in Lesson 3, we're going to learn about the format and decimal places properties. The next property that I'd like to talk about is the format property. Now let's start the format property with a number, because numbers are pretty straightforward. Click on Num Employees, then click on the Format property, and drop this box down right here. You can see there are several different options for number formats. There's general number, currency, euro, fixed, standard, percent, and scientific. The general number format means that Access does its best to format the number as it should be. It's usually pretty good at guessing the right format for you. Currency and euro are for dealing with money. Now usually these go with currency fields, but you might have a number stored in a number data type that you want to display as a currency value, and that's okay. You can set it equal to number and then format it as currency or a euro. Fixed means you're going to display a fixed number of decimal points. Now, even though you have a long integer, you might still want to show 2 decimal points. So the number 5, for example, would show up as 5.00. That's okay too. Standard just adds the little comma in there. So your thousands will have a thousands separator with the comma. Then we have percent. Now remember, for percentage values, 1 is equal to 100%. So if you want 50%, you have to type in 0.5, which means we want to use a double, not a long integer. And then, of course, there's scientific. Now, scientific notation, for those of you who don't know, gives you that E plus 03 on the end there. That means 3.46 times 10 to the third power. That's all that means. We're not going to talk a lot about scientific notation today. We'll talk about that in a future class. So, for my num employees, I would just leave this set at general number, which you can leave that blank. You also get general number format if you just leave the format blank. However, for my discount rate, I currently have it set to double. Let's format this as a percentage. Now, let's take a look at what it looks like right now. Let's switch over to Datasheet View. Access says I have to save the table first. That's okay, save it. All right, there's my discount rate column. You can see this guy has a 0.5 discount. Now, when I convert that over to percentage, that should show up as 50%, because remember, percentages, 1 equals 100. I'm going to repeat that a couple times because people always forget it. If you want 10%, that's 0.1. So let's go back to Design View. Find your discount rate field. Set the format equal to %. Save the table, Control S. Now let's go back to Datasheet View. Take a look at our discount rate column now. You can see the first guy, 50%. Now all of them are showing up with 2 decimal places. If you only want to see 1 or 0 decimal places, you can change that with the decimal places field property. Again, let's go back to Design View. Discount rate. Now decimal places right now is set to auto. Let's drop this down. I'm going to set it to 0. I want 0 decimal places. Let's see what that looks like. Control S to save, and let's flip back over to Datasheet View again. And there we go. My discount rate says 50%. Now, let's try an experiment. Let's change this 50% to 50.7% and press Enter. Now look what happens. It says 51%. That's because when you set a format, Access will display a rounded value there in the format, but the actual value that you type in is still stored in the field. And I can prove that by setting the number of decimal places back to 1 or 2. If I go back in here to discount rate, set this, let's say, to 1 now, save the table, and go back to Datasheet View, and now you can see it says 50.7. So if you set a format, keep in mind that you're seeing rounded values sometimes, even though the correct value will still be stored in the table. That can sometimes confuse people. Note the currency data type also has a format property. If you don't want your currency values to look like currency values, you can come in here and change them to standard, where you get the comma, or fixed, where you can set the number of decimal points, or just a general number. Sometimes people don't want their currencies to all have the dollar sign next to them, so that's fine too. You've got general date, which is the default. It's got month, day, year, followed by hour, minute, second. Long date, which is the date spelled out longhand with the day of the week. Medium date, which is day, month, year. Short date. Then we have some time formats, because remember, a date-time field stores both dates and times. Long time, medium time, short time, which is a 24-hour format. So you can pick any of these that you want. For customer sense, I'd probably go with short date, because I don't need a time component for this. So I'd pick that, short date. And now when I save my table and switch back over to datasheet view, you can see all the customer sense fields are displayed as a short date. Even if you try to add a time component, for example, if I hit space here and then 6 p.m., it won't display that time. Because remember, I've formatted it as a short date, so it's going to show me exactly the format that I want to see. If I click on that field again, however, there you can see the 6 p.m. So again, remember, the format can sometimes hide relevant data. I'm going to get rid of that time component by selecting it and pressing delete. And of course, if you want to change it, come back here into design view and pick a different date format. For example, here's medium date or long date. If you decide you want a time component on it, use general date. That gives you both a date and a time. If this is only a time value, like clock in or clock out, pick a time format, and that's all you'll see. Now, if none of these preset formats work for you, you can type in your own format code. Let's say, for example, you only want to see the year that the customer has been with you since. Watch this. Instead of long date, I'll type in YYYY. That's a 4-digit year. Watch this. I'll save my table. And now look, when I come back to datasheet view, you can see just the year there. That's because that's the format that I specified. Now, if I click on one of these fields, you can see a full date still emerges. So even though you have it formatted a specific way, that's not necessarily the way you're going to type the data in. That's something we're going to use an input mask for. I'll show you that in a few minutes. But you can see the data any way you want by using a format code. Now here are the different date and time format codes. You can use M for month, D for day, Y for year, H is for hour, N is for minute since M is already taken for month, and then S for seconds. You can specify either 1 or 2 digits. For example, MM, 2 digits, will force a 0 to show up there. So if the month is March, you'll see 03. If you just specify 1M, you'll only see 1 digit or 2 if necessary. So you'll see 11 for November, but only 1 for January. The same thing with the year. You can specify a 2-digit year or a 4-digit year. Hour, minute, and second work the same way. Now you can add in some other characters like colons and slashes wherever you want them. So for example, let's say for customer sense, I want month and year. I can go MM-YY. That'll give me a 2-digit month followed by a 2-digit year. Save it. And that's what it looks like. A 2-digit month followed by a 2-digit year. If you change it up slightly, let's say a 1-digit month followed by a 4-digit year, there we go. You can see we get a 1-digit month unless 2 digits are necessary, like there's November of 2001 down toward the bottom. And you can make a very complicated one like YYYY/MM/DD space HH:NN. That'll give you year, month, day, hour, minute. Save it. And that's what it looks like. Now, these are very good for forms and reports, especially on reports. You can set a custom format, and your data will appear that way on the report. Generally, forms and reports will inherit the format that you set in the table. So if you set a format in your table and then build a report off of it, the report will grab the format out of the table. But you can set them differently. You can have a specific format in the table or no format at all, and then have a totally different format in the report. When we get to report design a little bit later in a future class, I will show you how you can have different formats for the same data in your different objects, your table, your form, your report. Now, for our database, for our customer sense, I'm going to set this to, let's go with short date, because that's all I need for the customer sense field. Now, there are a lot more format codes for dates and times. There's a big long list of them, and I will cover more of them in the expert classes. You can have formats for quarters, week of the year, all kinds of different stuff. If you click down here in the format field, right next to where it says short date here, and hit F1 on your keyboard, that will bring up the Access Help system. Here's the Access Help 2010 developer reference. I'm going to click on the textbox.format property right here. Then come down here to date, time, data type, and you can see the format property for date, time, data types. Scroll down a little bit, and you'll see all the different custom formats. Right, there's C for the general date. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 digit days. Right, first 3 letters of the weekday, the full name of the weekday, and so on. Week of the year, day of the week. There's quarter for Q. There's lots of different formats in here. We'll talk about all these different formats in detail in the expert series. Text fields also have a format property. You can use this to space out text fields that have a particular grouping, like phone numbers, for example. You have an area code, followed by a dash, followed by a prefix, another dash, and your suffix. Now for text fields, there are a couple of different codes you can use. For today, we're just going to worry about the @ sign. That little A with a circle around it, the @ sign, that says a character goes here. Then you can use other characters like dashes and slashes and colons and dots, whatever you want to use. But if you want to format a number like a phone number, that's the code you use right there. So for example, right here for format, notice if I drop the box down, there are no options. For text, you have to type it in. So, @ hyphen, @ hyphen, @ That is a proper phone number for the US and Canada. I'll save my table and switch over to datasheet view. And there are my phone numbers. Now notice they're formatted that way, but what's still stored in the table are just the digits. You don't actually want to store those dashes in the table. That way you can have nice uniform data. Now here's the tricky part. If you click on one of these fields, notice the dashes go away. That's because when you're editing the field, you don't see the format. That's why we're going to use another thing called an input mask that we're going to learn in the next lesson. The input mask controls how you type the data into the field. Generally, I stick to formats for displaying the information, usually either on forms where I can't change the data or on reports. And again, when we get to advanced forms and reports, we'll talk about that in more detail. But for now, you can use that format to just format and display the information in your table the way that you want to see it. Now that's the code for a phone number. If you wanted to change that to a different field, for example, a social security number, you could just adjust it like that. Social security numbers here in the US are 3 digits, followed by 2 digits, followed by 4 digits. And that's that. Now, the only other field that I'm concerned with as far as format goes for today is the yes-no field. And if you look for format under yes-no, you can see there are basically three different values. There's true, false, yes, no, and on, off. It does not change the data that is stored in the table either way. It's just the way it's displayed. It'll either say on, off, yes, no, or true, false. Internally, the value is stored as either 0 for false or -1 for true. You don't have to worry about that. Just keep in mind you can display it in three different ways. Why is it 0 and -1? Well, that's a discussion for an advanced class. But you don't have to worry about that today. Just keep in mind it's either 0 or not 0. Anything that's not 0 in Access is true. 0 is considered false.